When people say Megalodon was the biggest thing that ever swam, they're charmingly confident. Tonight, we're diving into a deeper ledger of giants, creatures so vast, so strange, they make even that celebrity shark feel a little underdressed. Quick roll call before we descend. Where in the world are you watching from? Type your city in the comments, then hold your breath. Down here, the dark remembers everything. It starts with a bone the colour of old tea, wave-worn and sugly heavy, lifted off a British shore by someone who knew it wasn't driftwood. Not a jaw, not a femur, just a shard from the side of the jaw, a serrangular, the kind of piece that, to most of us, looks like nothing. But to the people who read fossils the way codebreakers read telegrams, that one fragment was basically a scream. Scale the thickness, compare the curvature, measure the knotty ridges where muscles once anchored like ropes on a winch, and suddenly you're not holding a shard anymore. You're holding a shadow cast by something 20 to 25 meters long, not a myth, not a movie, a reptile built like a torpedo with opinions about speed. The ocean had already tried this experiment a dozen times by then. Make a lizard into a fish and watch it outperform most fish. The body plan is brutally simple. Streamlined barrel of muscle, stubby hypermobile paddles up front to fine-tune the aim, smaller stabilizers in the rear, and a rigid tailstock ending in a crescent fin that flicks back and forth like a metronome set to panic. No flappy eel nonsense. This thing ran on engineering. The skin, if you could have touched it, probably felt like a firm rubbery wetsuit with a layer of insulating blubber beneath. Yes, blubber. Because speed and long-distance travel are easier when your body runs hot. Counter-shaded too. Dark on top, pale below. The classic, I'm invisible if you don't try too hard outfit of the open sea. The head? Don't picture a crocodile's or a dolphin's. Picture a long, narrowing spearhead of bone. A skull built for cutting water and resisting load. And then the eyes. Ichthyosaurs are notorious for eyeballs so big they needed bony support rings to keep the globes from collapsing at depth. Think dinner plates recessed into a streamlined skull, ringed with scalloped bone like a Gothic window. The world those eyes were calibrated for was not bright and sunny. It was twilight water, the blue-black corridor where light loses its nerve and the cold climbs your spine. Down there, shape and motion mean everything. Down there you can be vast and still feel small. What did a giant like this eat? The polite answer is a lot. The more accurate answer is whatever the water delivered at scale. Smaller ichthyosaurs, sharks with fussy dorsal fins, shoals of cephalopods soft as silk and fast as nightmares. If it fit, it was on the menu. Now, many of the mega ichthyosaurs seem to have gone minimalist with their dental work, losing the big dramatic teeth in adulthood. You don't need a mouthful of knives when you can turn the ocean into a one-directional conveyor belt. Open wide, accelerate, pressure drops. Water, and everything in it commits to entering your future. Suction feeding, but not the goldfish version, the industrial pump version. The idea that this animal bit its dinner is almost sentimental. It took dinner. Imagine being in its presence, not attacked, just near it. Your world would go dim for a second, like a cloud crossing the sun, except you're already under endless cloud and that thought doesn't help. The animal arrives as silence. No splashy theatrics, no movie monster roar, just a pressure change that prickles the hairs on your neck. A reorganizing of water around a mass your brain cannot draft a sentence for. If you were an ammonite, you'd feel the sea blink and then your entire life would relocate 10 meters forward into someone else's afternoon. If you were a sizable shark, yes, you'd notice. And then you'd notice the tail flick and the way distance increases at a rate your muscles don't recognize from their training montage. This particular giant haunted seas that lapped what would someday be England when that coastline spoke a different language. late Triassic muds, and shallow shelves full of reef-to-be rubble. The ocean's pantry restocked after the catastrophic hangover of the end Permian extinction. Food webs were busy reweaving themselves with ruthless efficiency. Plankton boomed. Cephalopods painted the water column with commas and question marks, and reptiles reclaimed the open sea with the zeal of a startup promising to disrupt fish. The oxygen was decent, the coastlines complex, the currents generous. All the sliders that evolved giants were set to why not? A creature that long needs more than space. It needs a strategy. You don't sprint a 25-metre body from empty shelf to feast by chance. You ride thermal lanes where the water is fractionally easier. You clock seasonal movements the way birds clock stars. You draft behind your own wake because you're basically your own current. Maybe there were pods, loose congregations cruising the same routes, not because they needed friendship, but because the ocean writes economies of scale into everyone's DNA. And if they gave live birth, and ichthyosaurs did, picture a smaller version emerging tail first into that blue theatre, blinking, sort of, already swimming, because the ocean doesn't do maternity wards. It does momentum. An apex this size doesn't negotiate much. The adult menu of potential threats is short enough to memorise. Other leviathans at a bad angle, a rival miscalculating a kill, the occasional geological tantrum. Juveniles, though, smaller, slower, tasting faintly of the future, would have been currency. Everything eats babies. That's a rule older than rules. The big ones grew out of vulnerability as quickly as their metabolism could manage, stacking centimetres onto vertebrae like coins in a jar until their mass alone flipped the script from prey to problem. And yet all we have with eerie confidence is that single jaw fragment from the English coast and a few others like it, a jigsaw puzzle with most of the sky pieces missing. Bones this size do not fossilise helpfully. The same buoyancy that let them grow absurd also ensures that, when they die, they bloat, drift, rupture, scatter and nourish everything nearby. The ocean recycles giants with unsettling efficiency. That's why paleontology often reads as forensic minimalism. A curve here, a joint surface there, a groove shouting, "This was tendon" in a dialect of limestone. From those scraps, measurements happen. Ratios are compared to better-known relatives, Shonisaurus, Shastasaurus, and conservative math looks you in the eye and says, yes, 20+ meters is not delusion. You can argue over the exact number, and scientists do in lively caffeinated paragraphs, but you don't get to argue with the scale. People love to bring up Megalodon here, as if there's a single auditorium where all these things ever met after school. They didn't. We are spanning tens of millions of years and multiple ocean personalities, but as a visual aid, fine. Line them up in your mind, chalk silhouettes on an endless pool. The shark is a muscle-bound guillotine with fins. The ichthyosaur is a living missile with lungs the size of rooms. One is a biter, the other can simply vacuum you into its biography. If both chose you, only the manner of your absence would differ. There's a clinical elegance to how this animal would have lived. Accelerate, feed, rise to breathe like a slow, patient submarine, steam curling off your blowhole in the cool night air. No blowhole, that's for whales. This one took air the old-fashioned way, through nostrils, but let the image sit for a second, then slide back down the gradient into the cold jurisdiction where your eyes earn their keep. Heart rate trims down and the world narrows to the high-signal shapes. A spiral shell, a school of belemnites, the pale flicker of something making a mistake. You hold a cruising speed modern tuners would respectfully applaud. You burn energy like a diesel generator and refill it with living fuel that never stops swimming past. And when age finally catches you, there is no ceremony, just a vast failing engine returning its elements to the ledger. The strangest part remains the beginning, that we met this thing via a single stubborn bone left behind in a cliff that we built a country on. Walk those coasts today and you'll see dogs, kites, a fish and chips wrapper doing its sad air ballet. Under your feet is the paper-thin border above a museum without walls. Somewhere in there, the rest of the Leviathan is still ledgered in stone, or it dissolved into anonymous pebbles centuries ago. Either way, the fragment did its job. It told us that once, just offshore of the map we're so pleased with, the water briefly belonged to something that could cruise past a modern city bus and barely register it as punctuation, and that the sea, when properly motivated, writes sentences no land animal has ever had the grammar to speak. Picture a submarine that never learned humility. The sea is black glass, and then it isn't. The surface hisses, splits, and a long, pale form exhales the night out of its lungs. 2 quiet breaths, each big enough to fog a rowboat, and the animal vanishes again like a rumour that refuses to be pinned down. That's the rhythm of its life, up for air, down for everything else. Long before whales did this trick with grace and hymns, there was a reptile doing it with machinery and intent, and the ocean made room. There's a specific kind of confidence in a body that stretches past 20 metres. You don't dash anywhere, you arrive. The chest is deep, a cathedral of ribs, the kind of frame that suggests engines, not dainty movements. The paddles, forelimbs turned into hydrofoils, don't flap, they correct. They tilt a little, and hundreds of kilograms of water are politely moved aside. Behind them, the tail stalk tightens, and the world starts to slide backwards. If you could stand on its back, please don't. You'd feel the animal as a set of tensions resolving into motion. Tendons like cables, muscles shearing under a slick skin that probably felt like tough neoprene with a layer of warm insulation underneath. This isn't fantasy. Big fast ichthyosaurs were likely running a high-octane metabolism, and insulation solves heat loss at speed. Nature had already learned the torpedo with blubber lesson once. It kept the design notes. The skull is a study in purpose. Long, narrow, and clean-lined, nearly built to ignore drag. The jaws don't advertise violence with big, ornamental teeth. Adults of this lineage seem to have taken the minimalist route, either tiny teeth or none at all, because when the meal is measured in buckets, you don't need knives. You need physics. Open the mouth, accelerate, let the pressure drop, do the impolite work for you. The water folds inward, and with it an entire shoal of soft-bodied cephalopods, the Triassic's drifting punctuation slides gratefully into the future tense of your digestive system. The bite force, irrelevant. The suction, indifferent and absolute. You can track the feeding event in the way the light changes. A school of squid analogues, flashing in very small, very nervous ways, suddenly condenses forward as if the ocean itself has been tilted, and then silence, bubbles, not even blood because there's nothing left to leak. The hunter barely slows. If a smaller shark or a fish the size of a person happened to be there, well, congratulations, you're now in the category incidental protein. The giant does not behave like a tyrant, it behaves like weather. This is late Triassic water, stitched together into vast basins while the continents still argued about where to sit. The coastlines are ragged with promise, reefs in draft form, slopes that fall away into blue corridors, upwellings that carry the pantry up from the dark. Oxygen's good eph, nutrients circulate, and the cephalopod factories are open 24/7. That's how you get a body this big. A conveyor belt ecosystem, and a physiology that can exploit it. When people say the Triassic was weird, they usually mean Earth was bored and tried some grand designs. A 20-plus meter ichthyosaur is one of those designs that stuck. Even giants get born small. Ichthyosaurs gave birth to live young, tail first because the sea has rules about the order of operations, and the first breath of a baby the size of a human door happens at the surface under a moon that does not care. There's no nest, no nursery, just a mother who has to keep moving so that water, and therefore oxygen, keeps moving past her muscles. Somewhere in the dark, Something bigger than your fears and smaller than its own future learns to swim by not drowning. The young likely kept to safer water, tracking the shadows of their elders the way a small aircraft might shelter in the wake of a cargo plane. Everything in the ocean eats babies. The strategy is to get out of the baby business quickly. There's a temptation to imagine one of these alone against the world, a solitary sovereign. But economies of scale suggest otherwise. Where there are migration corridors and seasonal booms, there are informal fleets. Not tight pods with synchronized ballet, this isn't a dolphin recital, but loose caravans, aligned by shared maps etched into muscle memory. They ride temperature gradients like highways, find the same banks of life year after year, and exchange exactly as much social energy as is required to not accidentally ram each other at 40 kilometers per hour. If two of them do collide, the sound would be a structural event. The water would briefly forget how to be water. Everything about the head says see in the dark. The eyes are oversizzed, braced by bony rings so the globe doesn't implode when the pressure piles on. Down there, sunlight dissolves into a rumour, and bioluminescent commas flicker, where words never finish. The giant doesn't need detail, it needs edges, flows. The negative space around a fleeing shape. The pupil swallows the world, and the rest is handled by enormous lungs and blood tuned for extraction, pulling every last useful molecule of oxygen out of every breath it banked at the surface. Up and down the elevator ride repeats, each cycle a quiet transaction between impossible size and the physics that allows it. People ask about speed as if that's a personality trait. The answer is cruel and efficient, cruising fast enough to make distance vanish, sprinting when the return on investment justifies the burn. Think of the tail as a metronome marking out a tempo that smaller animals can't maintain without lighting themselves on fire from the inside. The giant doesn't care about your panicked dash. It is a creature of sustained inevitability. The ocean rewards inevitability. Prey tries zigzags. The hunter adjusts a fin by 2 degrees and reality follows suit. Threats? For a full-grown behemoth, the list is short. Bad luck, geological tantrums, and its own maintenance schedule. But scrape away a few meters of length, and the world gets interested. Other large marine reptiles, opportunistic sharks, even a hungry adult of the same species might edit you out of the food chain if you drift wrong. That's why you grow like a debt. Vertebrae stack robust and fast. Paddles ossify into reliable levers, and the body's insulation thickens into a declaration. I will make it to the big league. Once you're there, the calculus shifts. You're no longer a meal, you're an event. It's charming that we deduce most of this from bones that resisted becoming gravel, and from relatives preserved better than you'd expect after 200 million years of erosion and indifference. A rib dimension here, the proportions of a paddle there, the geometry of a jaw that says I create suction more than I deliver bites. Add the sheer size of the chest, space for lungs like vaulted rooms, and the inference that this animal lived in the big blue, not the postcard shallows, starts to look less like story and more like accounting. Paleontology is a long-running heist movie, where the crew steals truth from geology using rulers, ratios, and spite. At night, when the surface is a cold lid and the stars shiver in the ripples, the giant's ascent is a moving column of displaced water. It breaks through, exhales, inhales, and in that breath there is the damp thunder of an engine catching. If you were somehow adjacent, you'd feel it in your sternum. No roar, no theatric, just the kind of deep-bodied sound that says, maintenance of a warm, enormous life is ongoing, please stand clear. Then the animal cants one paddle, angles its long, pale skull toward nowhere in particular, and sinks with intent, leaving behind only a circle of ripples that widen into insignificance. exactly like your understanding of what just passed beneath you. The strangeness isn't that a reptile became an ocean's flagship. The strangeness is that, given the late Triasic's booming assembly line of squid and fish, of course, something did. The sea hates empty niches. It fills them with engineering solutions, streamline the body, move the nostrils up out of the splash zone, weld fingers into paddles by multiplying their segments, shift reproduction to live birth so you can keep pregnancy on the move. Tweak the chemistry so you run hot, go long, go deep, breathe air, own water, repeat until extinction notices you, which it eventually does because the ocean keeps its own calendar. Until then, the submarine inhales the sky and returns to the abyss, and the abyss, delighted, opens its hands. It does not arrive with teeth, it arrives with geometry. The sea is cluttered with small lives, cephalopods writing commas into the water column, fish rehearsing synchronized panic, and then the geometry moves. A pale spear of a skull, strangely short-faced for such a long animal, slides out of the blue. The mouth opens, not to bite, but to rearrange physics, and everything in front of it suddenly belongs to behind it. No thrash, no gore, just a hush and a subtraction. If Megalodon was a chainsaw salesman, this thing is the industrial vacuum you rent when the basement floods and your house insurance starts asking pointed questions. The blueprint is calculated indifference. A deep barrel chest, long, efficient torso, 4 paddles like adjustable wings that trim a 20-meter life by a degree at a time, a stiffened tailstock that ends in a crescent blade and says very clearly, "We will be going that way at that pace." The hide? Imagine thick neoprene pulled taut over a warm machine. The ocean will eat your heat if you let it. And the big Triassic ichthyosaurs likely didn't. Insulation is cheaper than constantly rebuilding A to P at panic rates. Countershading too, dark on top, pale below, the universal nothing to see here livery of predators who prefer results over drama. Focus on the head because that's where the sin lives. Unlike many of its needle-snouted cousins, this giant carries a shorter rostrum with jaws that look almost demure for something so huge. Adults trend toothless or nearly so. Juveniles might sport modest dental starter kits they promptly misplace as they grow into their terrorism. Teeth are great if you plan on shearing meat. They're a nuisance if your strategy is to turn seawater into a one-way conveyor belt and let mass flow solve your grocery list. Open wide, kick the tail, and the pressure right inside the mouth drops. Water obeys. The surrounding ocean hurries in to fix the imbalance, bringing armfuls of squid and small fish like a nervous assistant. Biting is a hobby. Suction is a policy. You'd hear it only as a brief insult to the silence, a gulping wet thunder from a throat the size of a hallway, and then a rolling burp of displaced bubbles. The hunter barely slows. Momentum is king in bodies this long. A just-fed Shastasaurus, call it what it is, will let the taxonomist's arm wrestle in the hallway. Banks with immodest grace, 4 paddles feathering, tail ticking like the pendulum of a grandfather clock that has outlived several families and sets up for the next vacuum event. Somewhere in the dim blue, a school of belemnite-bodied cephalopods has become an accounting error. The late Triassic ocean invites excess. Continents are still Lacerta workshopping their final outfits. Seaways sprawl like lazy arteries. Upwellings throw nutrient parties on continental margins, plankton booms, and with it bloom billows of soft-bodied protein. Exactly the kind of prey you don't need knives for. Give an ecosystem a conveyor belt and it will print a giant. Give that giant warm, bloodish metabolism and a streamlined chassis, and you get an animal that turns distance into a hunting strategy. Smaller predators sprint and prey. This one cruises. If you're prey, you can sprint. But the vacuum doesn't need to be faster than you. It only needs to keep arriving where you're going to be forever. Picture the eyes. Ichthyosaurs were champions of ocular seriousness. globes so large they needed bony sclerotic rings to keep their shape while pressure nudged inconveniently at their squishiness. Down where daylight goes to dissolve, you don't want colour or detail. You want edges and motion cues, the negative spaces that betray a shape making a mistake. The pupils choke wide. The world reduces to what moves wrong, and the mouth handles the rest. Above, lungs the size of small rooms bank oxygen like a miser. Blood pulls the last courteous molecules out of every breath, and the animal rides the thermometer gradient like an elevator it owns. Was it alone? The romance says yes, one submarine monarch doing solitary laps of a kingdom, but the economy says behave. Where prey blooms are seasonal and predictable, giants tend to appear in loose fleets, not chatty pods with synchronized ballet, but caravans aligned by the same maps. They travel the same thermal lanes, revisit the same pantry shelves, and communicate mostly by not killing each other with wake turbulence. You'd see them at distance the way you see mountains from a highway, shapes that the horizon considers furniture. When they surface to breathe, they don't announce themselves with arias. 2 breaths to reset the blood chemistry, a ripple like someone pulled a bedsheet over the sea, and they're gone again, back into the hallway lights. Even monsters start small. Live birth is the ichthyosaur trick, the only safe option when eggs are, frankly, chewable gift-wrapped hopes. Tail first, the newborn slides into a world that is already moving, a meter or two of future learning how to not be eaten while it learns how to breathe. There are no nurseries, only slightly less terrible neighbourhoods. Everything eats babies. The race strategy is growth. Stack vertebrae like rent payments. Thicken the blubber layer into a savings account. Expand the hyoid apparatus, the tongue and throat foundation that powers suction, until your sip can misclassify a small shark as soup. By the time you're the length of a bus, the list of things that can end you has shortened to catastrophe and another you on a bad day. If you need proof for this story, you get it in fragments. Ribs big enough to double as beams, 4 paddles with finger bones multiplied into sturdy paddles, vertebrae marching to the horizon, skull pieces that end abruptly where a long snout should be, and simply don't. To paleontologists, that absence is loud. Combine it with reduced or absent teeth and you can almost hear the suction, see the soft tissues we never get to keep, broad cheeks, muscular throats, collapsing and ballooning like bellows driven by a patient engine. California gave the genus a name. China coughed up cousins with better preservation. Europe contributed arguments. The fossils are polite but firm. This was a suction specialist scaled up to civic infrastructure. There's humour in imagining this animal trying to be dramatic. What's it going to do? Pose with a rip carcass for the tabloids? There are bites in the Triassic fossil record, and some of those bite marks belong to lizards with ambitions. But this thing's horror is bureaucratic. It files you into the correct folder with the universe's driest stamp, processed. Look directly into that mouth mid-gulp and you wouldn't see a smile of daggers. You'd see darkness travelling toward you, a tunnel where the walls are made of choice. In the physics of feeding, drag is the enemy of living large, and the skull reads like design language for cheating drag. Shorter snout equals less lever arm, equals more efficient pressure change. Open fast, open wide, keep the edges clean so the water accelerates without annoying turbulence. The paddles choreograph micro-adjustments so the mouth stays aligned with the densest cross-section of prey. The tail doesn't just push, it times the push to the gulp, a bass drum cue for a brass section of water molecules recently informed they have a new job. Somewhere inside, the hyoid bones, unassuming in most creatures, pull and pivot like a set of hidden pistons. Result? The ocean becomes briefly directional. Night is this animal's favourite disguise. Under the stars, the surface turns mirror black, and the breath of a 20-metre hunter becomes a fog nobody can explain. If you were floating there on some impossible Triassic paddleboard, You'd feel the intake of that breath in your ribs. 2, maybe 3 inhalations, each a quiet storm. Then the pale form rolls, a dorsal silhouette that may or may not have a fin. The Triassic is stingy with soft tissue receipts, and vanishes on a diagonal. Below, bioluminescent specks answer with punctuation marks, ellipses mostly. Then the lights go out again because the vacuum is back on. There's a running joke among people who love these bones. The taxonomy is an eternal family dinner argument. Is this species really this genus, or that larger, bossier cousin? Shuffle the names, swap the badges. The animal doesn't care. Its physics are the same, its ocean is the same. Its job description, convert prey density into forward motion and body maintenance, remains pinned to the break room corkboard. What we call it only changes the label on the museum drawer. Imagine standing inside its chest cavity after the sea has swapped life for limestone, ribs arching like rafters, the ceiling low with the weight of time. You could almost feel the lungs there, the stale heat of them. You could almost hear water moving past, a constant whisper outside the cathedral walls. That's the part that makes your spine cold. Realizing this wasn't extravagance, it was efficiency. The animal looked absurd by our land mammal standards because our standards are provincial. Out there, where pressure and darkness and distance run the company, elegance looks like a wide mouth, a short face, a huge engine, and the arrogance to trust that the sea will keep restocking the shelves. And so it moves through its world like a quiet policy decision, unpopular with the fish but relentlessly enforced. A turn of the head, a pressure change, a school of soft-bodied punctuation marks abruptly re-edited into a single period. The ripples spread, the dark closes, and the vacuum hum fades back into the background noise of a planet that keeps trying out new shapes for hunger. The desert remembers the sea by the weight it left behind. In southern Peru, where dunes glow like banked coals, a hill of stone yielded vertebrae that feel less like bones and more like gym equipment, polished cylinders of gravity. You lift one and your wrists complain in a language older than fear. Welcome to the Eocene, about 39 million years ago, when a coastal whale decided that the best way to beat buoyancy was to bully it. The name we gave the culprit is almost a confession, a Peruvian colossus, a basilosaurid, an early whale, haunting the warm, shallow margins of an ancient sea. The blueprint is brutal in its simplicity. Make the skeleton stupidly heavy. Park the body where sunlight still cares. This animal's bones were not hollow promises. They were thickened and densified. Pachyostosis plus osteosclerosis. The unholy duo paleontologists lump into pachyosteosclerosis. It's the same trick manatees and dugongs use. Turn your ribs into ballast bars so you can hang motionless just under the surface, unbothered by every bubble of your own breath. Add enough stone to your scaffolding and you don't float. You set. That's not pathology, that's strategy. We don't have a skull to sneer back at us. Just a partial skeleton, 13 vertebrae, 4 ribs and hip bone, all swollen with density like marble poured into the shape of anatomy. Even without the face, the outline emerges from the math. A body on the order of 17 to 20 meters long, a living pier that crews the tide lines. And the skeleton alone? Estimates suggest it outweighed a blue whale's skeleton by 2 to 3 times, which is the sort of sentence that makes engineers open a new spreadsheet and start drinking. At first pass, the headlines did what headlines do, they crowned a champion. Rough calculations pegged the animal's total mass to somewhere between "are you sure" and "that breaks the scale," on the order of 85 to 340 metric tons, potentially rivaling or surpassing the heftiest blue whales. Heaviest creature ever? It was a fun week to be a fun fact. But science sleeps with the lights on. The follow-up analyses brought a cold towel and pointed out that if you cram that much mass into a body that length, the physics get uppity. A whale that dents in shallow water would fight to stay near the surface like a stone trying to fake it in a pool. More conservative re-estimates put the giant back into the realm of very large but not record-obliterating modern whales. The bones are still outrageous. The total may be merely astronomical. So what does a coast-hugging slow-motion dreadnought do all day? Not sprint, not chase. It edits its relationship with water. Those hyper-heavy ribs and vertebrae act like trim weights, giving the animal neutral or slightly negative buoyancy right where the sun still filters green and the seafloor rises to meet curiosity. Instead of exploding across open pelagic emptiness like a rorqual on a deadline, it loiters, an ambulatory reef with lungs, a drift forward here, a slow pivot there, a weight-assisted hover over beds of life. Sirenians do the same in grass meadows, ballast to hold a lane, patience to graze. This is the hydrodynamics of staying put on a planet that keeps wanting you to float away. Without a skull, the menu is mostly rumour. Teeth would tell us whether this was a shredder, a sucker, or a connoisseur of soft things that don't leave marks. But the coastal address and the ballast-heavy frame whisper certain habits. Fast prey is pointless if your top gear is tied. Benthic invertebrates? Easy. Carcasses drifting into the shallows? Why not? Opportunism scales beautifully when your very presence discourages argument. Picture it nosing along a sandbar's edge, a continent-coloured bulk suspending itself with its own stonework while fish reconsider their to-do lists. Even its breath would have sounded architectural. Surface, exhale a fog bank, inhale like a basement filling. But here's the sinister part. If you push that mass too high, the surface becomes a problem, not a home. The critiques of the wildest estimates point out that a creature so overburdened would, paradoxically, have trouble staying up. The surface is where air lives, but it's also where a heavyweight risks sinking the moment it pauses. This isn't the soaring ballet of a blue whale. This is a gravity negotiation carried out in meters, not miles. The ocean, as ever, enforces its clauses. Now imagine seeing it from a small boat you shouldn't have borrowed. The water bulges before it breaks, then a pale back surfaces, not sleek but monumental, as if someone was rolling a chunk of pale cliff through a green auditorium. No dorsal fin slash. It doesn't need to signal. The animal is a landscape with lungs. Next to this, even a giant shark reads as minimalist design. A fast, efficient triangle compared to a moving seawall. You don't flee a seawall, you yield the coast and feel lucky. On length, the celebrity shark still holds its own. On presence, this thing could darken your afternoon just by existing. The world it ruled wasn't empty blue. This was a warm greenhouse earth with fat coastlines, broad shelves, and a pantry that restocked on a schedule. In what's now the Ica Desert and the Pisco Formation, today's parched museum of yesterday's sea, its bones sank into sediment that would one day trade waves for wind. Field teams hike those badlands with plaster and hope because the stone still remembers how to keep secrets. Out there, every rib that surfaces reads like a rebuke to our neat categories. Whale, yes, but the kind that treats the shoreline like a throne. And because we are compulsive, we keep revising the silhouette. Some researchers argue the body might have been a little shorter than the earliest length estimates, still enormous, just trimmed. Others remind us that the skeleton by itself, without any muscle, already tips scales that make curators swear kindly. The debate is not a weakness, it's the pulse. Every new rib fragment, every vertebra with its marrow replaced by stone, tightens the focus on a life that weaponized heaviness. Monstrosity, it turns out, isn't always about speed or teeth. Sometimes it's a design memo. Be the weight the water can't argue with. so the scene you carry with you is quiet and heavy. A coastline afternoon, shallow green water pushing its own reflection shoreward, something pale and tonnage honest sliding under the boat like a slow continent. It does not chase, it does not flee. It arrives and the sea yields because mass is a kind of authority. The breath fades, the ripples mend. The dunes go back to pretending they were never waves. And the bones wait for someone else to lose an argument with gravity and tell the story again. It arrives like weather, not a hunter, not a storm, but a moving absence where light used to be. The first thing you notice is how the water changes its mind. One moment the sea is a glitter of plankton and nervous fish. The next, the world goes dim under a drifting cathedral of bone and muscle, longer than a city bus line and shaped by a single obsession. Eat the ocean by the mouthful and leave almost nothing behind. The name we gave it admits the truth. A riddle wrapped in fragments. The jaw parts and gill arches that survive say enough. This was not a biter. This was a suspension feeder with an industrial-scale intake system. Gill rakers lined with delicate plates. A living sieve that turned cloudy water into calories while the rest of the Jurassic went about its noisy business. You can picture the head even if we don't have it whole. Long, clean lines, a mouth like an open bay, arches bristling with those fine combs instead of teeth. It glides forward, opens wide, and the plankton doesn't so much flee as surrender to fluid dynamics, corralling itself across the raker plates while the fish barely slows. Close the mouth, push the water back out through the filters, keep the food. That's the trick. 1 million minuscule lives condensed into one unbothered swallow. Modern whale sharks and basking sharks make the same argument for bulk with sieves. This one made it with bone. And among bony fishes, nothing we know has outgrown it. Not the swaggering ocean sunfish with its 2-ton sulk, not any scaled show-off alive today. Leedsichthys sits on the throne of Osteichthyon size, a quiet monarch crowned by a mouth. The ocean it ruled wasn't empty blue, it was the Middle Jurassic's Oxford clay seaway. Murky, rich, a continental shelf that behaved like a conveyor belt of life. Plankton bloomed in green curtains. Cephalopods painted the water with punctuation marks. Pliosaurs patrolled like short-tempered torpedoes. And cruising through all that drama was a fish that refused to be dramatic. No slashing teeth, no ambush. Just the rhythmic set and reset of the gill basket as the animal harvested the crowd. If you were inside that soup, you wouldn't hear a roar. You'd hear the hush of a problem being solved. We met it fittingly in pieces. A farmer named Alfred Leeds started hauling giant what-ifs from British clay pits in the 1880s. Plates, rays, the odd arc of gill hardware. And the experts squinted, misfiled some as dinosaur armour, rude, and then finally realised they were staring at the facial furniture of a giant fish. They named it Leedsichthys problematicus because the fossils were maddening, disarticulated, incomplete. 1,000 parts of a machine without the instruction manual. That's always the deal with giants. The skeleton ossifies where it must and cheats everywhere else. But the few pieces that do survive are like headlines. Enormous fin rays, a gill basket that could rent its own postcode, rakers built to comb oceans. People argued about size as if they were bidding on a ghost. Early labels offered a polite approximately 9 meters. Then the pendulum swung into myth and the creature ballooned in print to 30 meters plus, which would make it the length of an office building laid on its side. The sober math came later. Growth, rings in the bones. Yes, this fish kept a diary and lines. Hint that individuals could hit 8 to 9 meters by about 20 years and keep going, topping out around 16 to 16.5 meters in their late 30s. That's not legend, that's paperwork. counted in annual bands of tissue and checked against the gill basket's unforgiving geometry. Big enough to darken an afternoon, big enough to outlength a whale shark, big enough to be largest bony fish without having to shout about it. There's a grim elegance to how it lived. Filter feeding's bureaucracy and endless intake, endless sorting, endless throughput, open, strain, close, repeat. The gill rakers, those combs, aren't crude brushes. They're plates arranged to maximize capture and minimize drag. Proprietary Mesozoic design that made every mouthful count. The body around that system reads like a support memo. Long pectoral fins for fine control, a tall tail to keep the conveyor belt moving, and a torso wide enough to anchor the gill basket like scaffolding. Nothing is wasted, even the quiet is functional. Follow it for a day and you'd learn how patience becomes predation. At dawn it patrols the greenest water, where the bloom is thick and the light tastes of chalk. By noon it's a shade moving under the surface, turning slightly to keep the densest plankton in the mouth slipstream. By evening the gill arches hum and the fish is full, but this is bulk with bills to pay. The machine never really stops. It may have travelled with others the way modern filter feeders sometimes do. Parallel lives on parallel routes. Not a social club so much as a mutual agreement not to collide. That's the closest this fish gets to drama. Two silhouettes intersecting and then not, because the ocean is big and the rules are simple. And we don't have a diary entry saying they schooled. We have analogies and the physics of plenty. If you want menace, look sideways. Juveniles would have been bite-sized for anything with ambition and a jaw. Marine reptiles, sharks, even a pliosaur testing the perimeter of its courage. The strategy was to outgrow the crisis, to stack years and centimetres until your only predators were accidents and geology. The growth rings read like a ladder out of childhood. By the time you push into double-digit meters, the ecosystem stops thinking of you as food and starts thinking of you as weather. Everything we assert comes with the humility of fragments. No completed backbone has graced a museum. Vertebrae are suspiciously absent, which is either preservation bias or the animal's sly way of reminding us we weren't invited to the whole story. Still, the pattern holds across fossils from Britain and beyond. Pieces of gill basket here, fin rays there, a rain of parts that, when assembled in the mind, give you a silhouette you could recognise from a helicopter, if someone had invented helicopters 165 million years early. And because paleontology refuses to be tidy, Leedsichthys sits inside a lineage, Pachycormids, that kept perfecting the filter-feeding lifestyle for over 100 million years. Names like Bonerichthys and Rinconichthys carry the torch later in the Cretaceous, proof that the ocean loves an efficient idea and will run it until the lights go out. There's a moment I keep replaying, the surface of a Jurassic Sea under a windless sky. The water is green glass, and then it subtly bulges, as if something enormous has politely asked it to make room. Up comes a back like a pale plaza. No dorsal fin showboating, just the patient heave of a lungless colossus tasting air, the way a furnace tastes fuel, through gills, yes, always through gills. It makes no sound you can name. It leaves a ripple that looks like a thought you almost had, and as it slides away, the plankton behind it swirls in its wake, reforming the sentence it just erased with its mouth. We give monsters teeth because we're vain. Teeth make us important. Combat, agency, the operatic clatter of survival. But the sea is older than opera. It will frighten you with a sieve. It will build a fish that turns abundance into inevitability, that grows not by chasing, but by refusing to stop. Leedsichthys is the part of the ocean that doesn't negotiate, the sum of 1 billion dots of life calmly redirected into one. And it keeps going season after season, year after ringed year, until the math of its size becomes the only argument that matters. It moves like a rumour lengthened into fact, a pale ribbon of vertebrae unspooling through warm Eocene water, bending the seafloor light into wrinkled stripes. Long before whales learned the compact torpedo elegance of the modern blue and fin, there was this, a serpent-bodied mammal that traded grace for reach and subtlety for spectacle. They named it king lizard by mistake, Basilosaurus, because the first people to meet its bones saw the coils and thought reptile. Later, the teeth tattled. Mammal, whale, not a beginner either, fully oceanic, committed, domesticated by depth. The legs, technically present, tragically useless, tiny, jointed, with little toes like a punchline you're not sure you're allowed to laugh at. They weren't for walking, they were for touch. Mating props, a paleontological stage whisper. I remember the land, and I choose not to return. Imagine looking down through green water and seeing the back and forth of a creature that doesn't swim so much as right its body into the sea. Where modern whales push with a massive tail stalk and a fluke like a flying wing. This one also rides a wave travelling down its length, vertebra after vertebra tipping the water aside and travelling S. The tail ends in a fluke of its own, the bones hint at it. But the engine room is long, an absurd corridor of spinal architecture, each centrum stretched like taffy. Hydrodynamics as poetry, anguilliform power scaled to bus length and then some. It is not fast in the swordfish sense, it is fast in the inevitable sense. You, small fish, can sprint. It brings the horizon with it. Lift the skull from the sand in your mind and turn it. The snout is long, the jaws a pair of loaded shelves. Up front, bullets, incisors and canines for seizing and puncturing. Behind them, slicing plates, a row of multi-cusped molars that meet like pinking shears. This is the part where whale stops being gentle in your head. Bite marks in the fossil record tell a blunt story. Juvenile whales, Dorodon, with skulls punched and raked, the bone shattered in ways that match the geometry of Basilosaurus teeth a little too perfectly to be coincidence. Apex predator doesn't mean angry, it means efficient. Grip the head, crush the command center, and dinner stops arguing. A modern orca would nod in approval, then ask to borrow the toolkit. The world it owns is greenhouse Earth, late Eocene, a warm ocean draped across the shoulders of North Africa and the American Gulf Pole coast, shallow seas freckled with reefs and sandbars where everything edible eventually wanders too far from clever. In Egypt's Wadi al-Hitan, Valley of the Whales, the desert keeps a ledger of their afternoons, vertebrae curling over dunes, ribs weathering out of rock the colour of old honey, skulls lounging where waves used to breathe. You can walk through that place and watch the story unfold in 100 directions at once. Coils of Basilosaurus laid out like anchor chains, shorter, stockier cousins nearby, and the bite-marked heads of the unlucky telling you that this was not a place to be small and curious. Surface behaviour. Functional theatre. No blowhole set high on the crown yet. That comes later with sleeker whales. But the nostrils have crept back along the snout, edging toward the forehead like a plan in progress. Up it glides, breaks the skin of the sea with a long, pale arc, exhales a low, damp thunder, inhales like a room taking a breath, and slides under again with hardly a wake. The ears are the trick. Deep inside the skull is the hallmark of whale kind. Dense, isolated ear bones that turn pressure waves into directional gossip. Sound becomes a map. A flicker becomes a path. Down in the green, eyes are optional. Hearing is the everyday miracle that keeps the larder stocked. Predation with a body this long looks theatrical even when it's not trying. You can stage it, a corridor of mangrove-shadowed shallows, fish schooling the way panic does when it thinks it's clever, and the serpentine line of the hunter coming in oblique. First a feint, turn the school, compress it. Then the switch. A kink runs down the spine, the head snaps, the front teeth plant, and the molars do carpentry. If the prey is substantial, say, a young cetacean with big ideas, there's a follow-up you feel more than see, a twist, a shake, the water quivering as mass argues with will. The shock travels through your ribs. When the head goes quiet, the hunter lets the long body unspool again, a white ribbon rewriting the scene. It did not need company to be terrifying, but imagine the spectacle when territory overlapped. 2 adults in North America, Basilosaurus setoide in North Africa, Basilosaurus isis, crossing paths along a shelf edge. Not social in the dolphin sense, more like wary co-owners of a franchise. They register each other at distance, long backs glinting, small breaths ghosting, a slow roll presenting the pale underside, a quiet divergence of roots that means, I see you and also no. If they did collide in anger, you'd get something that reads in the water as a structural failure of the medium itself, a double-length knot of muscle and violence. The sea briefly confused about which way is least dangerous. Weight is always the question with fossils. This one is all length and leverage, not the heavy cinder block density of the coastal ballast whales that came later in strange experiments. The vertebrae are big but surprisingly airy, riddled with internal architecture that keeps strength while cheating mass. It reads like an animal designed to hang between layers of warm water, to breathe often, hunt often, and never, ever consider shore. The pelvis, such as it is, floats like a souvenir behind the ribs, a tiny set of bones to which those absurd little legs attach. Knees, ankles, toes, no contact with the ground. A small private choreography reserved for the narrowest of moments when 2 long bodies try to solve the puzzle of alignment. Everything about Basilosaurus says branch, not blueprint. Modern whales do not descend from it the way a child descends from a parent. They nod to it the way cousins nod across a family reunion, recognition and gratitude, then back to their own business. It represents a version of whale that solved the ocean with a snake's vocabulary and a mammal's appetite, then bowed out when climates shifted and currents rearranged the pantry. But while it lasted, Oasis, it owned a very specific fear. The kind you feel when a shape that should belong to a myth rises beneath you, and you realize myths are just drafts of the truth. Take the jaw in your hands, carefully, because the teeth are still sincere after 30-some million years, and you see wear facets where enamel met bone in the same places again and again, habit incised into mineral, up front puncture marks in prey, in back, slicing grooves. Some molars carry accessory denticles, little saw teeth along the edges that turn meat into organised concessions. There are shark teeth found near its bones too, but usually not as owners, more as employees, cleaning up after the big shifts are over. At night, in that old warm ocean, the surface would have held a skin of stars. If you could float there, hearing the faint ticking of small lives, you'd catch a darker line rising from below. No glow, no lure, just the geometry of appetite. The first breath would be a fog on the air, warm against your face if you were dishonestly close. The second would smell of fish and old salt and something mammalian, wet, warm, a library of proteins. Then the long back would roll, and you'd see the tiny hind limb flick for a heartbeat, like a curled question mark before the animal sank and the water smoothed itself, as if embarrassed by what it had shown you. What does the brain inside that skull do all day? It runs a checklist. Breathe, listen, angle, strike, tear, swallow, surface, repeat. Mammal-level smarts don't have to mean poetry. Sometimes they mean optimized boredom, the kind that pays bills in calories. But even boredom looks like ritual when the body is this baroque. You can call it a monster if that makes you feel safe. Monster implies exception. The Eocene didn't think in exceptions. It produced rulers for every niche: filter-feeding fortresses, armoured grazers, saw-snouted menaces, and here, a yard-long smile built to cut. The ocean wrote them all down in limestone. Sandpaper winds and careless boots edit the text. Enough remains. There's a last image I can't shake. A calf. Doriden. Ghosting the edge of a shallow bay like a shadow that hasn't learned to be afraid yet. A pressure ripple behind it, tiny in the beginning, growing. The calf turns, puzzled. The water buckles. Something pale and absurdly long arrives from stage left with the unhurried confidence of a thing that has never had to run. A snap, a stillness, and then only the ordinary choreography of fish returning to the scene, because the ocean is very good at moving on. Down in the sand, a future desert takes notes. It starts, as these things often do, with a shadow under green water and the feeling that the sea has grown a spine. A pale hull glides beneath you, long, low, unapologetic, and for a second your brain thinks submarine. Then the mouth opens. Not the neat triangular smile of a shark, but a hinged vault bristling with conical teeth and, because the Cretaceous like to over-deliver, a second set of pterygoid teeth marching down the palate like a private security detail. Whatever goes in does not get a vote. The jaw doesn't just close, it commits, and the water remembers where it was. Call it what it is, a marine lizard that forgot how to be modest. Squamate stock, more kin to monitor lizards than to crocodiles, retooled by 80 million years of salt and speed. The limbs have been flattened into stiff sculling paddles, the trunk stretches into a long hydrodynamic fuselage, and the tail ends in a two-lobe fluke with the vertebral column pitched downward into the lower lobe. Earlier artists drew it like a snake with flippers. The sea corrected them. This is a warship, tail-driven, built to sprint. One heavy beat from that hypercircle tail, and the horizon slides toward you like a mistake. The head is an argument for over-engineering. A high, heavy skull with a forward battery of grasping teeth, and behind them, molarish killers with wear facets that say, plainly, "We met bone." The lower jaws aren't welded into a single bar, they're joined by flexible tissue and an extra joint in the middle, inframandibular kinesis. So the gape can widen and deform around whatever it has no business swallowing but will anyway. The palate teeth hook backward to keep lunch from staging a comeback. Even the replacement system is industrial. Teeth bud inside the jaw and erupt into place like conveyor belt products. Nothing is singular, everything's continuous. This one, the big name carved into quarry lore, comes from the last chapter of the Cretaceous. Warm seas, high shelves, and the slow, smug drift of continents doing their endgame waltz. In a limestone hill at Maastricht, quarrymen pried a skull from the rock and accidentally kicked open modern paleontology. Napoleon's soldiers carted the prize to Paris. Cuvier pointed at it and said extinction is real, and the whole world had to admit that the ocean once owned monsters with a legal residence. The species name honours Hoffman. The stage honours the city. Maastrichtian. The final scene. Curtain due any moment now, but the players don't know it yet. You meet the animal properly when it decides to inhale a turtle. First, that pressure shadow, water bulging around mass with intent. Then the turn quick for something so large the skull canting just a few degrees as the paddles torque and the tail carves a bracket in the sea. Impact is not cinematic, it's mechanical. The front teeth pin the shell where leverage pays best, and the head drives a torsion through the neck you can feel in your own molars. The bite lands, the palate teeth lock, the shake thinks about starting and decides it's unnecessary. A turtle is a structural problem, the skull is a set of solutions. Everything about the skin says streamlining with texture. Impressions show small overlapping keeled scales, the kind that wisp through water and manage boundary layers like a good paint job. Counter shading? Likely. Dark roof, pale belly, the standard open water invisibility cloak. The nostrils ride high on the snout so breathing can happen with minimal fuss. Inside, a pair of salt glands probably does the boring hero's work of dumping excess sodium back into the sea, because you can't be a lizard in an ocean without learning how to sweat through your face. The heart runs hot by reptile standards, high output for long chases, and the muscles along that tail stalk are stacked like coiled ropes. This is a long-distance sprinter. Savage acceleration, big glides, recover on the move. Hunting styles multiply. Open water. It becomes a pursuit missile. Close the gap in silence and arrive with consequences. Along a shelf edge, it turns ambush predator, hanging in the green and then exploding forward when a shoal of fish makes a geometry error. Ammonites with baroque shells bite the rim, crack the siphuncle, and drink the Cretaceous' favourite snack like a polite vandal. Plesiosaur, too slow to pivot. Take the flipper, end the steering, let the rest solve itself. Seabirds plunging for fish. Sometimes the sea bites back from below. The palate teeth do the paperwork. Breathe, dive, listen, repeat. The ears are classic Squirmate hardware retrofitted for the big blue. Dense ear bones, good transmission, a skull that carries low-frequency threat the way a cathedral carries sound. Vision handles the rest. Big eyes recess under a cliff-top brow, tuned to edges and contrast. The sort of eyesight that reads panic in the flicker of a school before the school knows why it's panicking. There's no lateral line here. This is not a fish. But water carries news, and every scale is a telegram the brain has already opened. If you must ask how long, the conservative answer is long enough to ruin an afternoon. Well over 10 metres, with the rosiest estimates pushing past 15 for the true ships of the line. Not the longest thing ever to swim, nor the heaviest, but an apex built like it understood the word apex personally. The mass rides low and wide, a centre of gravity that keeps the roll civilised when speed makes fools of lesser designs. Up top, nothing showy. No dorsal fin becocking, no sail. Just the smooth, pale rise of a back that tells you, in the subtlest possible way, to get out of the way. Reproduction is serialistic, live birth. No beaching, no eggs. Neonates show up in the same open water sediments as the adults, which is the ocean's way of saying maternity suites are everywhere. Good luck. If you're small and shaped like your parents, you're a snack. By sharks, by larger mosasaurs, occasionally by the parent's cousin who never learned boundaries. The only defense that matters is inches. Grow quickly. Trade fragility for length before the statistics find you. Bite marks on juvenile bones are not tragedies. They are the curriculum. Territoriality reads like geometry. Open water doesn't fence well, but resources do. Shelf edges, current intersections, migration corridors, the places where life gets dense. These are the addresses worth forwarding mail to. Two big adults cross paths and the sea holds its breath. There's posture in the glide, a set to the paddles, a roll that shows the pale flank for one long second. Maybe they parallel each other for 50 metres, the maritime version of After You. Maybe the tail flicks, and that's the end of it. When conflict happens, it's quick, architectural. Skulls meeting like battering rams, tooth scrapes on bone, a whirl of white water, then the clean punctuation of a diverging wake. The mouth is a museum of bad news, even idle. Each tooth is seated deep in its socket, with fresh ones nursing below, ready to erupt if something cracks. That's the thing about apex work. It wears the tools down. On some specimens, the enamel is crazed and battered like a used crowbar. The tips are polished to a fine, ugly sheen by a career of biting things you shouldn't bite if you were delicate. You can see the job description embossed into the mineral, and where prey bones bear the record, scored, gouged, crushed, the pattern matches back to those teeth-like fingerprints. Now picture the surface at dusk. The wind has gone home, the water lies like smoked glass, air gathers the day's last heat against your skin. Then a pale ridge rises and travels, a long, slow back with a shallow trough of wake on either side, quiet enough to be a hallucination. The nostrils touch the air. Exhale, a soft, hoarse gust. Inhale, a wet, cavernous sound with the seriousness of a pump switching on. The head does not linger. The mouth has other plans and the lungs trust them. The body slides under again, a disappearing sentence you will spend the rest of your life trying to finish. History is smug about this animal because it helped write the rules. The Maastricht skull told Europe that monsters didn't need a myth to exist. They needed a quarry and a war to deliver them to Paris. The science that crystallized around that fossil, the idea that extinction was not a theological insult but a geological fact, pulled a thread that unraveled a whole old world of certainty, all from a lizard that traded land for lawlessness and built a kingdom on breath and bone. Its end wasn't personal. The sky fell at the end of the Maastrichtian, and the light went weird, and the base of the food web choked on the consequences. Giants are economies wrapped in muscle. When the plankton stumbles, the fish stumble. When the fish stumble, the apex wonders why the echoes got so loud. The warship kept patrolling the lanes long after the war moved on. Then the last patrol became the last. Full stop, and the sea filed the hull among its other unfinished stories. What stays with you is the etiquette of the thing. Not rage, not cruelty. Authority. The way a head turns half a degree and everything else recalculates. The way those backward hooked palate teeth mean we're done here, without ever raising a voice. The way a tail beat resets the terms of the conversation for 50 meters in every direction. It is not the biggest. It does not need to be. In the Cretaceous, scale was a language. This animal spoke grammar, rules that shaped what size meant. And as the shadow passes beneath you and the water grows heavy with its passing, you understand that there are monsters with banners and drums, and there are monsters that bring only physics. This one brought physics, and physics is rarely late. Here's the part where the ocean lets you think you understand scale, and then smiles with too many teeth. The star of your nightmares shows up late to the fossil record, and wears two names because taxonomy has petty moods. Call it Otodus Megalodon if you like precision, Megalodon if you prefer the sound of a door slamming. It swims in slow and deliberate like a verdict. The water changes tone around a body built like a torpedo stuffed into a freight container. You never see the whole thing at once. You see sections, a dorsal ridge sliding under you like a travelling hill, a tail that carves punctuation into the sea, a mouth that opens as if the horizon has hinges, teeth first because that's what time kept. Triangular, thick, serrated like industrial shears, hand-sized in the small ones, dinner plate ridiculous in the record holders. One tooth is an anecdote. A tray of them is a personality type and a shark that kept hundreds in service across multiple rows, shedding them like confetti its entire life, replacing each with a backup already queued under the gum line. Some edges look polished, as if steel cables had passed over them for years. Bite a whale's rib cage often enough and enamel starts to remember you. It's fashionable in coastal gift shops to hold one of those teeth to your palm and pretend you've met the animal. You haven't. Teeth are the polite part. Behind them sat the business end of a lamniform predator supersized into the Miocene and Pliocene, a bulk that took the torpedo template of modern makos and great whites and added a second, quieter instruction: be inevitable. The skeleton, being cartilage, surrendered to the sea. What survives besides teeth are vertebral centra, stone donuts the size of dinner plates in the big ones, laid out like a railroad the ocean forgot to cover. From these and from the proportions of living kin, we triangulate something obscene. Adults averaging well over 10 meters, giants pushing into the high teens, and, on the loudest days, 20. Weight enough to make a boat look like a hobby. You don't sprint that mass, you deploy it. Everyone wants a single number to love, a crown to place. Be careful with crowns. Biggest ever depends on which altar you kneel at. Length, certain Triassic ichthyosaurs may have beaten it by meters. Sheer mass, some early whales, dense-boned coastal dreadnoughts flirt with the record books. Bite per meter brutality, pliosaurs and other compact murder engines could claim the efficiency prize. But if you're handing out titles for weaponized certainty across warm oceans worldwide, this shark writes its name in block capitals. The Committee of Giants has many chairs. This one is upholstered with siren vertebrae. Imagine a hunting pass the way a whale would have experienced it. First, the geometry of the water goes wrong. There's a pressure ripple, the distant suggestion of a moving absence. You bank left, because your ancestors taught you to bank left. The shadow does not chase. It arrives at the new future you chose. The jaws open. This isn't a dainty bite placed on a limb for the theatrical blood curtain. This is an edit to your outline. The front teeth grip. The body throws weight through the target like an argument. The head shakes with the minimal amplitude required to break what needs breaking. Ribs give, lungs collapse, silence. The ocean learns the new shape of you. Bite force estimates. Yes, we did the math with models, and yes, the ranges make cautious people nervous. Land in among the highest ever inferred. A number that lives where adjectives fail and newtons multiply like gossip. Needed that power to do what great whites only sometimes dare. Park a mouth on a whale's chest and make the argument kinetic. Whale bones from the right age carry the receipts. Scored, gouged, serration signed. Vertebrae with semicircular bites missing like someone went at them with a saw and a grudge. Healed marks too, which means not every attempt was finale. Even apex predators get told not today by physics and bad angles. The range was global so long as the water stayed warm. Fossil teeth turn up on every civilized mantle in most continents, a confession of how thoroughly this shark audited coastlines. Warm, shallow nursery beds were hummed with small teeth, evidence of juveniles living the dangerous childhood that everything in the sea must endure. You can stand on a modern beach and look out at a quiet line of waves and know that millions of years ago, this was a daycare packed with miniature razors learning to be inevitable. Everything eats babies. The strategy is growth and more growth. There's a point where statistics peel away from you because your body writes its own exception. What did it look like, really? Not a great white scaled up like a cheap movie poster, though that's the cultural compromise we keep. The lineage diverged deep in time. Still there, a Lamnid-style engine is a good bet. Massive conical snout, heavy deep torso, tall caudal fin, built for speed and endurance. Pectorals like wings for banking a living bus. There's even a whiff of warm-bloodedness in the isotopes. Regional endothermy, the trick modern makos and whites use to keep muscles and eyes running hot in chilly water. That buys you range, that buys you ambush options, that buys you an appetite you must repay in whales. The playbook wasn't all gore. A favourite manoeuvre seems to have been disassembly first. Remove propulsion by taking the tail, or remove steering by taking the fins. A disabled whale is a future meal with manners. Track it. Let blood and exhaustion do payroll. Return when the screaming in your metabolism demands a deposit. Ambush wasn't theatrical leaps and spray, it was geometry. Show up at a trajectory where prey will be in 30 seconds and let 30 seconds keep its promise. Everything alive has enemies. For adults, the list was short and impersonal. Illness, parasites, an underestimation of how much energy the next kill would cost, an unlucky encounter with a rock shelf in shallow water at speed. The more interesting enemies arrived at the end, the climate retuning the ocean's thermostat toward cool, currents redrawn by continents playing new games, prey distribution changing so that the buffet moved north or simply shrank. Think of a machine built to convert warm whale-rich coastlines into motion, and then watch the coastline get colder and the whales smaller or seasonally absent. Now add competition, mid-sized, efficient hunters with faster life histories and less terrifying overhead. The math starts clearing its throat. People love to argue that a new shark, sleeker, quicker, with its own sneer, shouldered the giant aside. The truth is less gladiatorial and more bureaucratic. When the base of the food web hiccups, everything above it coughs. Giants are fantasies wrapped around equations. Change the inputs and the fantasy ends. The last teeth sediment down into the rock record like punctuation at the end of a paragraph the sea was finished with. And yet, for a few million years, what a paragraph. Breaching? Possibly, though the footage in your head is more honest as spray and impact than as theatrical sky. Speed? Enough. Not a swordfish, but a monster that could force the ocean to meet it halfway. Intelligence? Sharks don't write poetry, but they do write algorithms in muscle and nerve that border on elegance. Temperature, preference, current choice, approach vector, strike angle. Ritualized boredom with lethal outcomes. This is the part where people ask, does it make all other monsters look small? Depends on what you measure. Hold a tooth beside an ichthyosaur vertebra and tell me which gives you the shiver. Compare skull width to a pliosaur's bite hook and tell me which you don't want to see coming. Put a massive early whale's rib on a scale and watch the needle mock your boat. The ocean is not a monarchy, it's a rotating board of directors where power has multiple definitions and the minutes are written in bone. But if your metric is the human nervous system, if big means the shadow that makes your stomach fall through the floor, then admit it. A mouthful of serrated dinner plates and a body that turns water into verdicts is an honest argument. Picture the last time it surfaced beside something alive enough to be afraid. The sea is glass with a wind's last fingerprints on it. A pale back rises like a moving sandbar, scatters the reflection of a sky that thinks it's innocent, and takes a breath that sounds like a basement filling with water. The eye, dark, unreadable, passes, not pausing, not even curious. Then the tail lifts a little, and the animal angles down, the surface repairing itself as if embarrassed to have told you the truth. You feel smaller in a way that has nothing to do with length or mass. You feel sized by a system that doesn't care what you call the king, only whether you understand the rules. Water cheats gravity, that's the first conspiracy. On land, size is a tax. The square cube law sends invoices to your bones, your tendons, your posture. Get too big and your legs start writing complaint letters to physics. In the sea, the bill goes missing. Buoyancy picks up the tab, and suddenly the difference between heavy and impossible is a shrug. Skeletons get to be scaffolding again instead of load-bearing architecture. Ribs can be vaults, vertebrae can be cathedral columns, you can wrap muscle around a moving pier and call it a day. That's why the ocean keeps trying giant as a lifestyle choice. Not because it's dramatic, because it's cheap. Then there's heat. Big bodies leak it slowly. Surface area scales like the square of length. Volume. And the heat your metabolism produces scales like the cube. That mismatch means a large animal's basically a slow-cooling oven. In warm water, you bank the heat and run hot for long chases. In cold water, you become a thermal battleship. Fewer calories wasted on staying warm, steadier muscles, a brain that doesn't dim in the deep. Call it gigantothermy if you want the textbook word. Sharks hack the same trick with regional endothermy, keeping the eyes and red muscles toasty even when the water sulks. Whales go full mammal. Blubber insulation, counter-current heat exchangers, heart rates that slide down like a dimmer switch at depth. The colder or deeper you go, the more a big body looks like a good idea. And big bodies breed habits. Habits calcify into lineages. Speed does not belong to the tiny. The ocean is a viscosity playground. At small sizes you live in syrup. Every flick is tax audited by drag. Get large and you're swimming lives at terrifying Reynolds numbers where water stops feeling like molasses and starts behaving like air with opinions. Drag scales with area. Thrust comes from muscle, which scales with mass. The ratio tilts in your favour the larger you get. Cost of transport, the energy per kilogram per metre, drops with size, which is why a 20-metre traveller can commute entire ocean basins on a schedule, while smaller predators are stuck doing sprint and panic in coastal cul-de-sacs. Giants convert miles into a rounding error. Of course, none of that matters without food. The sea's second conspiracy is how it throws banquets in patterns you can set your life by. Coastal upwellings haul nutrients from the abyss. Plankton explode into green fog. The buffet arrives on a timetable written by wind and continent shape. Filter feeders are the accountants of this economy. Give them a reliable bloom and they will oblige you by turning seving into architecture. Baleen rorquals with ballooning throats that lunge like detonations. Basking and whale sharks with mouth as machinery. Jurassic pachycormids with gill baskets the size of rooms. Leadsichthys cruising the Oxford clay like a quiet factory ship. When the pantry is everywhere, fast stops mattering. Large and efficient wins while nobody's looking. Predators scale too, just differently. If filter feeders are about throughput, the meat eaters are about momentum. A megatooth shark solves whales the way a hydraulic press solves an aluminum can, by letting mass do the argument. A mosasaur doesn't need elegance when it has a tail like a pile driver and a skull built to reorganize turtles. An Eocene serpent whale writes murder in cursive with its whole spine. Even the supposedly toothless giants cheat. Triassic ichthyosaurs and Shastasaurus types swap blade teeth for physics. Open wide, drop pressure, make the ocean carry dinner into the mouth. Biting is optional if suction is policy. You can watch the body parts tell you what the water demanded. Enormous eyes braced with sclerotic rings. Good evening. Perpetual twilight will be hunting by edges and motion now. Dense-walled ribs and stone-swell bones. Pachyosteosclerosis in early whales. Welcome to the shallow shelf where being slightly heavy keeps you parked like a living pier while you browse the benthos and don't cork to the surface like a fool. Collapsible lungs, myoglobin-rich muscles the colour of dusk. Blood that hoards oxygen like a dragon. That's a dive plan dressed as anatomy. Giant bodies aren't just big, they're solutions strapped together. When ecosystems escalate, size shows up as an answer with teeth marks on it. The Mesozoic marine revolution arms the seafloor. Shells thicken, spines sprout, burrowers start living like fugitives. Predators answer with crushing jaws, faster bodies, deadlier senses. The arms race tallies casualties and discovers a simple truth. Being bigger doesn't make you immortal, but it thins the list of things that can end you. On a good day, an adult giant has two predators, catastrophe and a larger version of itself on a very bad mood. Life history stretches to match the hull. Giants are mortgages with flippers. You don't get a 2-ton calf without an industrial budget. Gestations measured in seasons, milk like heavy cream, migration routes that write lines across maps because the nursery is here and the pantry is there, and the corridor between them is the difference between lineage and footnote. Every extra metre of body is a risk strategy. Fewer babies, bigger babies, invest more per birth, defend with distance and bulk. The ocean helps, neutral buoyancy, fewer collisions with gravity, but it never forgets to add a line item labelled vulnerability. If your child takes a decade to pay back your investment, a single bad year of plankton can echo for a generation. Energy math decides what styles of giant are even allowed. Lunge-feeding rorquals trade explosive gulps for long fasting legs. Their throats accordion, their lower jaws swing like gates, and a single mouthful can weigh as much as a small car. But every lunge is a bet placed with oxygen and inertia. Too many failed lunges and the bank calls. A megashark's calculus is crueler and simpler. Cross the T on a whale, shatter the chest, wait out the blood, energy in, energy out. Ecologies with thick, predictable paydays mint colossi. Ecologies that wobble print obituaries. Climate fiddles with the knobs behind the curtain. Tip the planet into a greenhouse and epicontinental seas spills shallow warmth across continents. Nurseries and shelves and edges everywhere. Slide into an ice-tinged regime and currents sharpen. Upwellings strengthen. Seasonal booms go fluorescent and then black. Some giants flourish on schedule. Baleen whales time their commutes to the light switch. Polar summers as banquets. Winters as pilgrimages. Others, married to warmth or fat coastlines, get their wedding vows read back to them by a colder, stingier ocean. The abyss reserves a different contract. Deep-sea gigantism in invertebrates that grow slowly, live long, and treat calories like religion. Low temperature drops metabolic rates. Oxygen dissolves generously, predators thin out. An isopod becomes a suitcase, an amphipod an overachiever, a squid a rumour as long as a bus. Sound becomes the glue that holds a big life together. Water carries low frequencies like a cathedral carries hymns. If your body can afford organs the size of small appliances, you can make infrasound that deforms the horizon. For whales, that means songs travelling basins, mothers and calves knitting a line of contact through fog and night. For predators, hearing a surveillance, the dull thunder of a school turning wrong, the long moan of a distant whale, who hasn't yet learned it's broadcasting a dinner bell. Big animals move in big acoustic rooms. Their lives are composed in reverb. Scale isn't only for vertebrates. Plankton themselves are a conspiracy of small things made collectively huge. Blooms visible from orbit that feed sieves that feed everything else. Jellyfish can go from decor to dominance on a nutrient pulse. Salps string themselves into living conveyor belts. When the base fattens, the steps above it can risk growth. When the base falters, your champion shark becomes an accountant with no clients. For all the swagger, giants are the most fragile winners. Specialised hulls, specialised supply chains, specialised calendars. Change one arrow on the ocean's flowchart and the animal built from that arrow begins to erase. Cool the water, move the wind, shift the iron dust. Close a seaway, open a strait. The staircase that let a lineage climb to grotesque elegance becomes a slide. The record we read is not full of last stands. It's full of last meals, quietly missed, and then a littering of teeth, ribs, and promises. If you want to know why the sea grows monsters, stand on a cliff when the wind is down and listen to the arithmetic. Water supports, heat lingers, drag forgives, food concentrates, sound travels, distances become reasonable. The square cube law starts caring about you less than it does about everyone trying to catch you. Put all that together, and you get body plans that would collapse on land after 3 steps, thriving out there like it's nothing. A Shonisaurus turning suction into policy. A Leadsichthys writing ledger entries in plankton. A Peruvian whale that weaponized weight itself to squat on a coastline and dare the tide to lift it. A serpent whale cutting calves out of the gene pool with surgical boredom. A mosasaur that reinvented the warship from squirmate parts and never said sorry. A shark that didn't sprint so much as happened to you. The ocean is not sentimental. It will keep the bones of your greatness and loan them to dunes. It will file your teeth in gravel bars where children's hands will one day close around them and feel the echo of your bite. It will let us reconstruct your habits from grooves on enamel and growth rings, in fin rays and oxygen ratios in appetite. And then it will remind us that we only ever meet you as handwriting after the author leaves. But the handwriting's clear enough. Size is not a flex here. It's a solution the water keeps rediscovering, a recurring answer to problems of drag, distance, temperature, and fear. And fear is the part we're best at measuring. A shadow passes under a boat and your insides fall through the trapdoor. Not because you know its genus and species, but because your nervous system has done the math your textbooks are still working on. Out there, scale is what lets you hear farther, go longer, eat cleaner, and ignore things that would disassemble you on land. Out there, giants aren't rare, they're reasonable. The miracle isn't that the sea makes them, the miracle is that it ever stops. The dark keeps better records than we do, it just refuses to file them where we can reach. Most of whatever swam died off stage, dissolved politely, or was parcelled out by scavengers with no interest in your museums. A giant goes belly up and the script is always the same. Gases bloom, the carcass floats, currents drag, soft tissue sloughs, cartilage lets go, vertebrae step out of line like a parade losing patience. Sharks and fish trim the edges, worms handle the close work, bones knock together until the ocean misplaces them. Unless you're lucky enough to sink fast into quiet mud, no oxygen, no neighbours, no interruptions. You leave history with nothing but rumours. We build monsters from those rumours, from a tooth here, a rib there, a jaw fragment that hums with arithmetic. The darkness keeps the rest and charges a fee called uncertainty. Even when the sea is generous, it is choosy. Shallow shelves with low oxygen floors become vaults. Fine-grained shales where a dead thing can drop like a secret and be pressed flat into permanence. Elsewhere, limestone platters lay down in warm basins where time dripped calcium one patient ion at a time. Those places, call them the rare good mood of geology, trap silhouettes so crisp you can count gill rays in the folds of a throat. That's when the monsters become more than math. An ichthyosaur arrives with a belly of embryos and the stone admits, okay, live birth wasn't an educated guess, it was policy. A whale's ribs show bite arcs you can match tooth for tooth to the skull that did the breaking. A fish's gill basket is so big it turns a name into a unit of measure. Then the vault door swings shut for a few million years, and we're back to counting on our fingers. Open ocean, where the truly vast do their commuting, is almost never kind. The deep is a good preserver once it decides to bury you. It's just indifferent about burying you at all. No constant rain of fine mud, no steady snow of plankton chalk, no little anoxic pockets where microbes starve and give up. Out there the floor is far away and stingy. The abyss eats slowly and cleans thoroughly. Bones take on the slow geometry of dissolution. Mineral ghosts wander off as ions. What's left is a memory spread too thin to catch with a shovel. The animals that own those miles, fast, enormous, existing at scales that convert continents into waypoints, are the ones we meet most rarely. The dark keeps them out of reach, like favourite books it won't lend. What it does lend are proxies, stand-ins pretending to be truth. Tooth size whispers skull size whispers body length whispers mass. And every whisper carries an error bar like a shadow. A single vertebra becomes a railroad tie you try to extrapolate into a whole track. A jaw's curve gets scaled against a cousin with better paperwork, and you hope the family resemblance isn't lying. We weigh skeletons by comparing their densities to animals with names that haven't crumbled yet, then argue over whether the flesh on top was a sleek suit or a heavy coat. Paleontology is forensic poetry written with rulers, careful, repeatable, and always a little haunted. Sometimes the dark is actively hostile. Chemistry edits bones while they're still trying to decide whether to be bones. Phosphorus leaches, iron paints, calcite invades, cartilage and skin, everything that made the outline feel alive, usually choose rot over legacy. So we rely on exceptions. Sudden burial by a submarine landslide. A carcass pinned under a storm-dumped blanket of silt. A lagoon that's turned treacherous and sealed its guests in lime. Here and there the ocean signs its work with phosphorus-high soft parts that look like shadows of organs. Mostly it signs with nothing, and we learn to translate silence. There's a bureaucrat's comedy to how we date these ghosts. Ash layers sneak in from distant eruptions and set the clock with minerals that cool at known rates. The magnetic field flips and the seafloor records the tantrum, so a stripe of rock can declare its allegiance to north that year, and we can nod and put a sticky note on the timeline. Ratios of oxygen locked into enamel sketch temperature, and by extension depth habits. Did your predator hunt in the warm skin of the sea, or treat the thermocline like a revolving door? Carbon says what the base of the food web was doing, nitrogen hints who was eating whom. We assemble an animal's resume from the isotopic gossip of its teeth. Even with the receipts, the performance is incomplete. Behaviour does not fossilise easily. We infer tactics from injuries. Healed fractures in tails suggest a thing turned hard and fast. Furrows across ribs say a rival's teeth made their point, and it still grew old anyway. We read migration in the chemistry of annual growth bands and pretend we're sure about routes that no coastline remembers. We treat clustered skeletons as evidence for breedings or strandings and argue until the coffee goes cold about whether the current piled them there or a social instinct did. Meanwhile, the dark, which watched every chase and every breath, keeps its poker face. And then there are the ghosts we have to invent simply to keep the math honest. Ghost lineages, the polite term, animals that must have existed because their younger, derived cousins are here already squinting at us from rock, but whose bones have not bothered to attend the meeting. We pin them to the timeline like butterflies we haven't caught and wait. Sometimes the fossil record coughs a piece up and the ghost becomes a skull you can hold. More often the empty space stays empty, and we decide to be comfortable with absences you could sail a ship through. What the darkness keeps best is scale, not numbers, those we are indecently good at fabricating, but the sensation of it. How a 20-metre thing edits the sea around it as it passes, how the surface dimples before a back the size of a dock, the hush that follows an intake of breath big enough to fog a skiff. We can model bite force until the units feel made up, but we cannot bottle the way a water column changes its mind around a moving cliff. You only meet that feeling in person, or you let storytelling blindfold you and walk you close enough that your lungs remember what they evolved for. Every so often the desert betrays the dark. Wind slices into a hill that used to be a bay, and ribs slide out like the fingers of a buried hand. A winter storm chews at a cliff and drops a jaw onto a beach the colour of tea. Quarrymen split a slab and find a shadow that still remembers its own outline. We arrive late, brush dust from a face that has seen real monsters, and collect whatever the tide forgot to hide. The story expands by a paragraph. The darkness shrugs and changes nothing. You can forgive it for keeping secrets. There is a logistics problem at the core of eternity. Too many lives, not enough shelves. The sea solves it with erosion and appetite. We solve it with inference and patience. Between those two solutions lives a menagerie we only ever meet in cross-section. The real animals, the ones that slid through midnight water while continents were still deciding on their borders, are gone, and the ocean, being practical, has already rented out their rooms. Still, hints proliferate. A gouged ammonite records a bite that fits a jaw we only know from the other side of a continent, implying range on a map that got its coastlines wrong. A nest of little teeth in the same bed as giants' vertebrae says nursery, and an old shoreline comes alive with the quiet panic of juveniles learning the same algorithm that made their parents inevitable. A trail of coprolites, fossil feces, the most democratic of fossils, gives you a menu in the past tense. You stare at the fragments, and for a second the room smells like brine. And then you remember the unsampled worlds, colours of skin lost with their pigments, the shape of a pupil in an eye that stared into green night, the particular timbre of a breath from a throat big enough to startle birds miles away. You remember sounds, the infrasonic hums that stitched mothers to calves through fog, the shock of a tail beat passing through your diaphragm, the way a shoal's noise flips from static to alarm before anything visible moves. None of that sticks to rock. It sticks to nervous systems and dies with them. The dark keeps those on principle. It also keeps the unknowns we've talked ourselves out of asking. How many animals we worship as the giants were just one of several models running in the parallel oceans we haven't sampled? How many design experiments did the sea discard without leaving a parts list? Sleeker mosasaurs that never found the right shelf, heavier basilosaurids that squatted on coastlines that later turned to dust, filter feeders that refined a gill basket so efficient it left almost nothing in the water column to betray them. We assume the ocean's imagination is bounded by what we've found. The ocean laughs quietly and goes back to work. There's a superstition among field crews that you never say complete out loud. You say more complete than average, and you make the sign of the plaster jacket, because every skeleton you unveil is missing something crucial. The hour between breaths, the exact angle of a turn, the indecision before a strike, the habit that never left a mark. In their place are the marks that did, the grooves, the scrapes, the growth lines. We tally them and write our theses and pin them to timelines braided from ash, iron, and mathematical stubbornness. It's not the same as knowing, but it is a way of standing on a cliff at dusk and hearing the arithmetic of waves and thinking, yes, this is enough to build a shape from. Maybe that's what the darkness keeps for us in the end, the voltage of not knowing. The space where awe isn't a reaction but a tool, where you approach a single vertebra the size of a platter and understand you're holding both a fact and a dare. The dare is to tell the truth with as few lies as possible, to admit the margins and still make the animal breathe on the page. The dark doesn't mind. It is full of unbothered giants. It is also full of a billion small lives that never asked for a name. It will keep both with equal patience. Our job is to knock on stone, listen for the echo, and accept that sometimes the most honest thing you can say about the sea is that it remembers more than it's willing to share.